Welcome to Wildcide, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
It's a Wildcide Wednesday.
Hey, Wildsiders. We hope you are enjoying your summer. I hope you guys are somewhere with toes in the water and cheeks in the sand. I don't know.
Either pair of cheeks will be just fine.
That's right. That's right.
As just a quick hello and update, Chelsea and I are probably going to take several weeks off. So probably this will be our last episode for about 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Because we're doing a lot of traveling, and that'll give us time to kind of catch up on life, catch up on cases. And so expect us to come back probably the second week of July, maybe the first week of August. But we will put our updates on Instagram and Facebook. So if you guys don't follow us, please make sure to follow us on Instagram at Wildcide Podcast or on Facebook at Wildcide Podcast. And we'll give you guys updates. But hopefully y'all understand that this is, again, just a hobby. We do it for fun because we love y'all. But we also would like to enjoy a little bit of downtime in the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully you guys are as well.
Yeah.
So this case was an interesting case for me. I think that it really kind of showed me a different perspective on some different stances and some different ideas and ideals. And yeah, it was an interesting, like I said, it was an interesting case, and it definitely made me uncomfortable. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's uncomfortable in the right kinds of way. So
yeah, I agree. I think Chelsea and we are very middle of the road people in general.
Mm-hmm.
I will argue just to get as much data as I can. And I have no problem changing my mind on things and on topics and on perspectives. So anything that crosses the threshold outside of middle of the road, I naturally get a little uncomfortable. I know that sounds kind of crazy being a therapist, but that's a controlled environment, and I have some say-so in my expression and delivery. It's not the real world for a free-for-all, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. So anytime cases cover ideas that are more radical or more one-sided, that's always challenging for me because it makes me uncomfortable. But like I said, I really enjoyed being uncomfortable and thinking about a different perspective in this case.
Yeah. So hopefully you guys will get some different perspectives, and I'm sure we will do some unpacking at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can imagine sitting in a car and it explodes in broad daylight on a busy California street, and now think of what that is, what that feels like, right? The blast rips through steel and glass, and it nearly kills you, and it nearly kills the person in the seat next to you. So that's awful in itself. And then try to imagine that this wasn't a random act of violence, that it was possibly political or possibly personal, and both of those are horrifying. And it's about to become one of the most explosive cases in environmental history. I'm like literally.
Now, Judi Bari was a super feisty labor organizer, an environmental activist, a mother, and, arguably she herself was a truth seeker. She came onto the map because she started to challenge industries. And what followed was this weird, kind of surreal saga of environmental suspicion, a media frenzy, and arguably psychological warfare.
Now, this car bombing shattered Judy's body, but it also exposed a web of state surveillance and environmental scapegoating and drew the terrifying line between activism and domestic terror in the United States, which again it's just a really uncomfortable thought and an uncomfortable thing to think about.
Yeah. So you guys definitely need to keep all arms and feet inside the ride and buckle your seatbelt because this one is uncomfortable. And just as a quick FYI before we dive in, a full archive of Judi's writings, court files, music, everything can be found at judibari.org. So it's a digital platform created that you can get all of the details of this crazy rabbit hole. And I'm sure you'll want to after we dive in.
Yeah. Now, before Judi became the voice of the redwoods, before the FBI raided her hospital room, before a car bomb nearly severed her spine, Judi was a kid from a suburb in Maryland. She had a mind that moved faster than most and a mouth that rarely waited for permission. Judi was born in Baltimore in 1949 into a politically aware working-class family. Her father, Morris Bari, was a mathematician and a Labor Department official. Her mother was a homemaker with a sharp conviction and really no tolerance for complacency. The house was full of books, debates, and an expectation that you stand for something. Judi was a quick study. She had a near photographic memory and an insatiable appetite for reading. She was the kind of teenager who would quote Marx before dinner and challenge her teachers before lunch. People later called her a, quote, working class intellectual, just as comfortable in union meetings as she was in college seminars. Judi didn't waste time following a traditional path. She enrolled at the University of Maryland in the late 1960s, right as the world around her was catching fire. Civil rights, Vietnam, women's liberation, labor uprising. You know, it truly was a one-of-a-kind time to be alive. She threw herself into all of it. She wasn't content to chant from the sidelines, though. She really wanted to organize and to challenge and to ultimately build something better because she believed in a better future. And she carried that momentum westward, eventually settling in Oakland, California. But Judi didn't leave her values behind when she left the classroom. She brought them into grocery stores, picket lines, diaper duty, and divorce court. Her home became an unofficial organizing headquarters with flyers stacked beside children's toys and protest signs taped next to laundry baskets. Judi was raising a family and a revolution all at the same time.
Judi is in my opinion, Judi is a really interesting character, and her personality, characteristics, her quirks kind of mirrors what we see in other organizers who really have a high impact in the community. It wasn't just the passion behind it, because obviously Judi was a very passionate person. It was the integration. So she didn't compartmentalize her activism from the rest of her life like, a lot of people do. Like, I compartmentalize my therapy from the rest of my life. She kind of wove everything together. So her activism, being a mother, a friend, a partner, and all of that. Arguably, that is what really created the resilience that we see throughout this process. Now, after Judi left college, she took whatever jobs she could, bagging groceries, hauling crates, just to make ends meet. But even then, she didn't stop organizing because that was her passion. On her breaks, she'd be deep in political theory, which for the record, sounds absolutely revolting and terrible in my opinion. And late at night, after putting the kids to bed, she'd write labor pamphlets at the kitchen table. People kept telling her that she had to pick. Either you are an intellect or you're the mother/caretaker. But she wanted both. She felt like she didn't fit into anybody's box. She would call herself a Jewish mother, class struggle anarchist, and feminist. And not just for laughs. That was kind of her manifesto. She felt the need to embrace that contradiction because she was just so passionate on both sides of the fence. And so this passion is exactly what catapulted her into the world of activism. She wanted it on her terms, and that made her threatening to the systems that she opposed. Before Judi ever joined Earth First, she had deep roots in labor solidarity. She was a proud member of the Industrial Workers of the World, or Wobblies, which was organizing with a radical anti-corporate spirit that challenged power at its foundation. She saw no tension between saving trees and protecting jobs. To her, it was the same fight. When she said, "We're fighting the same enemy, let's stop fighting each other," she meant it. And when she joined Earth First, she didn't just fall in line. That's where she really started to kind of wholly redefine its mission.
By the late 1980s, Judi had relocated to Northern California, the front line of a war between timber giants and environmental defenders. Forests that had stood for millennia were vanishing in weeks, leveled by brutal clear-cutting practices. Activists chained themselves to trees, blocked logging roads, and risked arrest in defense of what remained. I don't know if you ever think of this, Bailey, but whenever I think of activism and activists, I always think of Sandra Bullock in that movie 2 Week Notice, like, with Hugh Grant. And like, there's a picture in my mind of her wrapped around a wrecking ball where she's just like, "No, we're not moving from this place."
Yeah, totally.
And it's just really something that I think when you find that passion, it's hard to quench it. And that was the type of passion that Judi had, is seeing these forests that were just getting leveled. But again, yes, she was angry about that. And she was angry about what she felt was unjust and unfair to the environment. But she didn't want it to just be noise from her end. She wanted to bring strategy to that front line. And there was a big issue at the time, and it felt like it was loggers versus environmentalists. But Judi saw that both of these communities, right, both the environmentalists and the loggers, were being manipulated by corporate greed. And she felt there was common ground that could be shared between the two groups. She believed the real fight wasn't between blue-collared workers and eco-activists. It was between both of them, and the corporates really were the ones that were exploiting their futures. So she dreamed up something bold, and she called it Redwood Summer. This was a massive campaign of nonviolent civil disobedience modeled after the civil rights movement's Freedom Summer. And it was strategically timed to hit the timber industry where it hurt the most during peak logging season. It called in hundreds of activists from across the country. But it wasn't just about redwoods, right? It was about who gets to lead a movement. Judi openly challenged the toxic masculinity and the hero complex culture inside Earth First, saying, quote, "Women in Earth First were tired of being the backup singers to the rock stars of the movement." She pushed for a community-based, inclusive approach that emphasized nonviolence over sabotage and coalition over confrontation. Judi felt she understood the systemic issues within both of these industries and felt it would take people of all walks of life to come together and work towards ultimately a better future.
Judi was a pretty razor-sharp character. Unlike most people I think today, arguably, rage wasn't really the all-consuming emotion that moved her forward. Kind of thinking of Sandra Bullock theme for this episode, kind of like when she's doing her Q&A at the pageant and they're like, what do you want? And she was like, world
This congeniality.
Yeah. So she's kind of like a super hardcore miscongeniality in a way. She was fascinated by the inner workings of industries and the influence that they had on people's lives. She recognized how power operated and how people responded to threat, and how trauma, individual or collective, could fracture a movement before it ever took root. Judi believed in interprofessional communication and prioritized building deep relationships first before sharing the narrative she felt so passionately about. And I honestly think that's something that we miss so much today, is people's opinions are their whole identity, right? She met with timber workers face-to-face, gave talks in union halls, and urged Earth First members to ditch the anti-logger rhetoric that alienated potential allies. Again, that's something that I really appreciate is, being middle of the ground. Like, you're very passionate about where you believe, but you're not alienating, isolating, or aggressive.
Yeah, and to me, it showed kind of this ability or willingness to be open-minded. And I truly feel like she wanted to work towards something bigger.
Oh, 100%. I mean, she was boots on the ground. She worked in the trenches. And she brought empathy and strategy, and it made her really effective. But it also made her kind of a threat, because unity, especially in this situation, in this context, was both good practice and it was extremely powerful. Unfortunately, power can be viewed as something to respect or something to fear. The movements that Judi was starting and the relationships she was building, it started to scare people in power. It began to threaten the narrative that kept logging towns and environmentalists at each other's throats. It revealed a truth that corporations didn't want out, that their exploitation was hurting everyone, and obviously just not the environment. So, safe to say, not a lot of people, or there were a lot of people, who did not appreciate her vision. Within the activist circles, some resented her calls for compromise. So again, the more radical people were frustrated that she was trying to teeter beautifully in the middle. Her insistence on building bridges made her a target. Law enforcement, timber industry, and even from her inner circle at Earth First. That tension, the pressure of pushing forward while being pulled in many directions, may have made what happened next even more devastating. Because just as Redwood Summer was about to launch, someone tried to end her voice for good.
May 24th, 1990. It was a Thursday morning, and Judi had traveled back to Oakland to promote Redwood Summer. Judi and a fellow activist, Daryl Cherney, were driving through the city, brainstorming about which stop should be their next. There was nothing unusual about the drive. They were talking, planning, probably listening to some sweet early 90s music, and it was supposed to be just another day out on the road, organizing like they had planned, and then, boom. A pipe bomb exploded directly beneath the driver's seat of Judi's Subaru. The blast tore through the undercarriage with devastating force. Judi's pelvis was completely shattered and her organs were severely damaged. She nearly bled to death at the scene. Daryl, riding shotgun, was also injured but survived. The explosion rocked more than just their car. It sent a shockwave through the environmental movement, especially because of what happened next. Rather than launching an investigation to find the perpetrators, the FBI immediately turned their suspicions inward on Judi and Daryl themselves. Law enforcement claimed they were, quote, eco-terrorists who had accidentally bombed themselves while transporting explosives. The timing couldn't have been more suspicious. Just weeks before the kickoff of Redwood Summer, the very campaign Judi had poured herself into. This wasn't treated like an attempted murder. It was treated like an excuse. And to many, it felt like a clear act of political sabotage, a warning shot disguised as an accident.
Now, in true Bailey fashion, I want us to take a pause. We're going to kind of circle back to what Chelsea was talking about earlier of, putting yourself in this situation. And I want you guys to imagine 1 minute you're in a car, the next minute you were waking up in a hospital, completely broken beyond recognition. And when you finally come to, you're not comforted, you're not coddled, you notice that you're handcuffed to the bed. And that's what happened when Judi woke up in the hospital. Not only was she in excruciating pain, she was barely conscious, but when federal agents came in, that's when they informed her that she was under arrest. So she's the one laying broken and mangled in a hospital bed. And that is where she learns that she's being arrested because she is now being treated as the culprit of what just happened. The amount of bamboozlement, betrayal, just being completely in shock, I think, in so many ways is the best way that I could describe that. She would actually later go on to describe that moment as the ultimate betrayal, and understandably so, for good reason. The people who society turns to, who is tasked with protecting the public, were the very people that essentially stigmatized her as a criminal and criminalized her trauma. No one asked who planted the bomb. They only asked how she had screwed up her own attack. So a lot of people would call this gaslighting on an institutional scale. And I think that this is what Chelsea says, what she means when she says it makes us uncomfortable. Because I don't think we like to view entities that are supposed to be good as things that weaponize things against you and that kind of thing, right? But arguably, this tactic at this time was to disorient, discredit, and destabilize. And unfortunately, it worked. Judi was not the first victim of this, right? And again, we're not getting into this whole political thing, but just to kind of paint a picture of the time and the situation. Judi's treatment echoed patterns seen in the FBI's infamous COINTELPRO operations, which were programs that surveilled, harassed, and discredited civil rights leaders, feminists, and anti-war organizers throughout the 60s and 70s. The FBI wasn't just investigating activism, they were actively working to dismantle it. Judi was simply the latest threat on their radar. Public suspicion was fueled by headlines, not evidence. The FBI refused to consider alternative theories or follow credible leads, and Judi's car was not taken in and collected as evidence. It was destroyed before an independent investigation could take place. All of the evidence was lost.
What we now know, thanks to years of legal filings, depositions, and sworn testimonies, is that the FBI and Oakland Police Department didn't build their case on evidence. They built it on assumptions. Even though some of these ideas are uncomfortable, I am so very thankful that these cases have happened, because I do think that our systems are better, right? Our current systems are better than they were before because of cases like this that brought to light the fact that they weren't building them on evidence. These allegations were built on assumptions. From the moment the bomb exploded, they fixated on Judi and Daryl as suspects, not victims, which is wild to me, right? And they refused to let it go. One of the most damning revelations came from the forensic timeline. The bomb was placed directly under the driver's seat, a detail crucial to proving guilt or innocence, right? If Judi had been transporting the bomb, it would have been in the back of the car, or maybe in the trunk of the car, not right beneath her. But early reports misrepresented the bomb's location, which cast a doubt where there should have really been none. And here's something even more telling. The bomb was motion activated, not time activated. That means it was designed to explode while the car was in motion, something that makes zero sense if Judi and Daryl were transporting it. Experts later said the device looked professionally made and strategically placed. Everything pointed to assassination, not accident. And if you can imagine, the fallout was immediate and invasive. FBI agents raided both Judi and Daryl's homes, seizing personal journals, protest materials, and private letters. None of it pointed to guilt. All of it felt retaliatory. Judi's legal team would later argue that this wasn't an investigation, it was a targeted campaign to criminalize activism. A smear strategy masked as national security, the FBI issued press release labeling Earth First a terrorist organization while offering no evidence. No bomb-making tools were found, no fingerprints, no known motive. But they had something more powerful than proof. They had a narrative, and it stuck. Judi wasn't just fighting to recover from the bombing. She was now fighting to clear her name. She was in and out of chemotherapy. There's a twist in the story, often too weak to walk. But she insisted on participating in legal process because while she was recovering from the injuries of the bombing, she was also diagnosed with cancer. Friends described her reviewing legal briefs from a hospital bed, cracking jokes between depositions. Judi knew she was dying, but she refused to let her legacy be written by the people who tried to erase her. And the louder she pushed back, the more determined the system became to silence her.
So here Judi is, struggling with breast cancer and fighting kind of the war with a whole branch of the federal government. They were going after her credibility, her legacy, and her very place in the movement that she was trying to reshape, right? Unfortunately, she was getting it from both sides. So not only was she getting it from the FBI side of things, but now she was getting more and more criticism from people within Earth First. And I think that is so hard to wrap your head around when people that you click with and believe and have shared, ideologies, all of a sudden start to treat you as an outsider. I mean, this must have been a really isolating time for her. And this was the point where she really started to openly criticize, which just is a sign of her rebellious nature, openly pushing back, criticizing this macho posturing and romanticism of sabotage. She said, monkey wrenching may be sexy, but organizing is what changes the world. And that kind of clarity, where she felt like she had a purpose, probably rather than ego, again made her a threat, but she was kind of a more complex creature than that. Law enforcement couldn't pin her down. And again, she wasn't radical enough for the super radicals. So she was just kind of stuck in the middle. The FBI went on to confiscate every fragment of the bomb and refused to let independent experts test it, which was not only shocking, but a devastating blow for Judi. Later, she would find out that her actions were not part of protocol. Legally, this is what we consider obstruction. And it left Judi with the unbearable burden of knowing that the very people sworn to find the truth in the system were working against it. And the result was a woman who was now physically disabled, mentally tormented, and being under constant surveillance, all while continuing to fight for a forest that she could no longer walk through.
Incredibly, Even with Judi in a hospital bed, Redwood Summer launched as scheduled. Activists flooded Northern California, many holding signs that read, "We are all Judi Bari." The campaign didn't just survive the bombing, it surged forward, fueled by outrage and solidarity. People from all walks of life joined together in what some could describe as a collective reckoning. Major environmental organizations and civil rights groups quickly called foul. The idea that Judi and Daryl would sabotage themselves on the eve of a national movement was insulting and seemed too damning to be coincidental. Editorials, press conferences, and op-eds tore into the FBI's logic, and protest signs mocked the narrative. From a sociological lens, the fallout exposed a troubling reality. When grassroots movements challenge power, especially corporate or political power, they often are rebranded as security threats. The media used words like radical, terrorist, and eco-extremist to isolate Judi from public sympathy. Never mind that she was a peace-driven, middle-class mother of two. Once framed, her identity didn't matter, and the image was rescripted. Judi's eventual lawsuit had two objectives. The first was to clear her name, but the second was to expose the ugly truth of how authorities surveil, disrupt, and ultimately try to break apart protests under the banner of public safety. This case would act as a stance against institutions and an example of courage amidst backlash.
Now, I think we are all wondering at this point, who actually planted the bomb and tried to kill Judi? Now, Judi had her own theories, and some of them hit painfully close to home. It could have been pro-logging extremists enraged by Earth First's tactics. But it wasn't completely absurd to believe that it was a government setup and an attempt to stop a growing movement. But among the arguably most disturbing possibilities was the one that Judi reportedly believed privately, that it was her ex-husband, Mike Sweeney. Judi and Mike had a long, tangled history. Both were activists, both were strong-willed, but close friends say their relationship really turned to toxic. He was described as controlling, emotionally volatile, and pretty vindictive. Judi never made a public accusation, which you can't really because that's slander without proof, but in private, she really carried a deep suspicion, fueled by incidents in their shared past that she never quite got over. But he was never charged for it. And I don't think it's a surprise because there is no formal investigation into his potential involvement, despite her suspicions. Judi lived with that anxiety while recovering from her injuries, while defending herself in court, and while organizing a movement. That kind of internal pressure, that emotional whiplash of public scrutiny and private suspicion, I think that it can really erode anybody on a psychological level. Whether the bomber was an industry plant, a quote rogue operative, or someone in her inner circle, I think that there was just no winning at that point, right? I can't imagine the vigilance of looking over your shoulder because then you can't trust literally anybody, especially if you think that powerful people want you silenced. And arguably, they had the means to make it happen.
I think what is so shocking for me in this case is the fact that, and maybe there were, Bailey and I could not find any evidence of this, but it didn't look that like Mike was looked into. I mean, they didn't process the car, like just the lack of any sort of give a dang, it seemed like. It is truly the most shocking for me. And I think that's why this case makes me so uncomfortable, because again, it kind of is like, there's no way that this level of gross negligence could happen. obviously there are recordings of it, right? Like Judi talks about this. And I believe that Judi's passionate stance of justice, or in her mind, this obvious injustice that was happening to her, really motivated her through the legal process. She felt it was necessary to continue with the lawsuits for the sake of accountability and virtue. In 1991, Judi and Daryl filed a civil rights suit against the FBI and the Oakland Police Department, and their claim was malicious prosecution, illegal surveillance, and violation of their First and Fourth Amendment rights. The message was clear. You can't just bomb activists and then frame them. You can't bomb or attack somebody who is exercising their First Amendment right of freedom of speech because you don't like it. It's just not legal. I don't care what era it is. It's not legal. Judi fought again while her body was failing, and she continued deposing FBI agents and building a paper trail so airtight it couldn't be ignored. She did not live to see the end because, unfortunately, Judi passed away in 1997. But her voice echoed into the courtroom because in 2002, the verdict finally came down. The jury ruled in Judi Bari's favor. The FBI and Oakland Police Department were ordered to pay $4.4 million, $2.4 million to Bari's estate, and $2 million to Cherney. It was one of the largest civil rights victories against federal law enforcement in recent history, a declaration that dissent doesn't equal guilt, and that the Constitution doesn't vanish when someone speaks truth to power. The evidence revealed during the trial laid bare a disturbing pattern: fabricated narratives, manipulated reports, and a total refusal to pursue other suspects. It showed the public exactly how dangerous it can be when those tasked with justice become the architects of injustice.
And I think that is almost kind of at the crux of this uncomfortability crossroad. But just when you thought this kind of shit show was over, it wouldn't be Wildcide without a little twist and turn. Even after that historic ruling, the fight was in fact not over. In 2010, 20 years after the bombing, Daryl Cherney filed a motion to stop the FBI from destroying the bomb remnants. So we have to ask ourselves why. Because the government argued that they had no further use. But Daryl knew better. With advancements in forensic technology like DNA testing, chemical analysis, explosive signature matching, those fragments might still hold answers. Those fragments were the only things left that could prove evidence and some closure for Judi and Daryl. The FBI arguably had mishandled the evidence from day one, refusing independent analysis, ignoring expert testimony, and burying leads. Letting them destroy it now would be the final insult, but also the final insurance. In his declaration, Daryl accused the FBI of running a deliberate campaign of narrative control, not just botched procedure, but calculated misinformation, kind of a smear campaign, in a way. He described years of unlawful surveillance, media manipulation, and psychological trauma and warfare aimed at silencing a movement by discrediting its leaders. Obviously, destroying the bomb would mean destroying the last shot at truth. Now, supporting Daryl, standing behind him through this process, was his attorney, Ben Wheaton, who emphasized that preserving the evidence was a matter of historical justice. Of course, I think it's no surprise that the FBI pushed back, and they pushed back hard. In their 2010 opposition filing, they called the evidence irrelevant, the testing pointless, and the storage a burden. It's probably sitting on a shelf right next to the JFK files. Oh, I think that was the CIA, right? Their argument was statute of limitations, simply that the case was too old and the materials were too degraded. But again, it sounded like an attempt to close a chapter that still had a lot of unanswered questions. And in doing so, they reminded everyone watching this case was never just about one bomb. It was about how a system tries to bury the people it can't control and what it takes to keep their truth alive.
Judi once said, "I was bombed in an assassination attempt. The FBI treated me like a perpetrator, not the victim." That quote hits harder than any explosion. It captures not just what happened to Judi, but how it was handled, how trauma is compounded by betrayal, how gaslighting by institutions can be more psychologically brutal than the event itself. The act of being physically injured and then suspected as the perpetrator became a case study in system-induced trauma. Judi's resilience really in itself was kind of like a case study. It was not the sanitized or the self-help version of resilience, but the kind that gets forged in fire. She was literally bombed. She was smeared, she was surveyed, she was diagnosed with cancer, and still she organized, protested, sued, and eventually she won. She raised children while under FBI investigation. She dared to stare down her own mortality and still chose to fight with a posture of continual resistance and valor. The interesting thing about hardship and trauma is that it has an unpredictable effect on people. Some people experience feelings of defeat and motion to retrieve, but in Judi's case, it caused her to speak up louder than before. And that's the part so many systems fail to understand. When you try to silence someone like Judi Bari, you don't erase them, you immortalize them. She made her trauma into her testimony. Yes, I think it's all clear that Judi was an activist, but through all of this, Judi was still a mother. Her 2 young daughters were with her during hospital stays, media blitz, and legal proceedings. She did try to protect them from the darkest moments, but they watched their mother endure bomb wounds, attacks on her name, and a terminal illness, all while fighting for justice. I imagine that being able to show your children emotional toughness and tenacity is something that no book can truly teach. She had the disarming way of winning people over, not by diluting her beliefs, but by humanizing the cause. And even in the darkest moments, she found ways to create. Her spoken word album, Who Bombed Judi Bari, put out by punk label Alternative Tentacles, wasn't just protest art. It was a living record of resistance. Her fierce, funny, and uncompromising voice became a megaphone for the silenced. One standout track called The FBI Bombed Me blends irony and outrage in equal measure. Judi turned her trauma into music and her music into a message.
Judi Bari was more than an activist. I would dare to say she was a cultural inflection point. She understood that oppression didn't come from corporations or law enforcement alone. It came from within the movement circles as well. She famously wrote, "The strength of a movement lies in its ability to build community, not destroy it." And I have to say, it was that line that really sold me on the case, because I think there is so much divisiveness today with strong belief systems on both sides of the fence, and I get really, really tired of it. And I think her view was spot on, right? Like, the strength in movement lies in its ability to build community, not to destroy it, right? So It isn't really a critique, but an organizational revolution. Judi was a whole stereotype in a lot of ways. She challenged the patriarchy, ego-driven style of early Earth First activism, right? But she didn't want heroes or martyrs. She wanted community organizers, people who built coalitions, not cults of personality, which I think is where we sit a lot today. In doing so, she showed that a resistance could be inclusive, strategic, and nonviolent. Her case showed how quickly the state will pivot from ignoring a movement to criminalizing it, especially when that movement starts threatening capital. Judi's case happened before 9/11, before the Patriot Act, before the Department of Homeland Security became a surveillance juggernaut. And yet it was a preview of everything that would follow. She was framed as a terrorist for organizing protests. That precedent would later be used against pipeline activists, climate justice organizers, and indigenous water protectors. But Judi was not deterred. She fused feminism, labor organizing, and environmentalism into one ideology. She famously said, "The fight for Earth is the fight for life, and life is a female thing." Which, all right, Judi, get on with your bad self. This was a perspective that many had not seen or considered, and in an industry that was thought to be primarily male and industrial. Today, her legacy lives on in environmental justice coalitions, college organizing campaigns, and grassroots labor movements that refuse to be siloed. Her story and movements have been studied in classrooms, memorialized in music, and passed down through activist networks like a survival guide. Judi Bari confronted the cracks within the timber industry and dared to question the ethics of American capitalism. She argued that an economy built on endless extraction wasn't just unsustainable, it was a slow form of violence. And in doing all of these things, she really made herself unforgettable.
Even today, Judi's story isn't over. Activists continue to demand renewed investigation into the bombing, and her supporters maintain the online archive at judibari.org. There are calls to retest the bomb fragment with modern forensic technology. For many, the fight for accountability and for the truth is still alive. Judi's voice lives on in forest protests, courtroom battles, and activist classrooms across the country.
Yeah.
I recently had to watch a movie called Walkout. It's actually a really great movie with Michael Pena. And it covers the walkout movement of the East LA schools in 1968. And it was interesting in this movie that the students that participated in walking out as a sign of standing up against the inequality that they were seeing across the districts, the school districts there in California, when the news covered it, they were saying that they were looking into the fact that this group of students could be communists, right? And that's the motivation behind it was this, attack on American nationalism and whatnot. And, interviewing the students that were a part of this, they were like, it was crushing to be labeled as a communist. Like, we had nothing to do with any sort of Cold War or any sort of other agenda. We just wanted to be able to have books and to use the restroom and have a chance for college recruitment like the other schools. So again, it's things that are uncomfortable to think about, but there are parts of our history, there are parts of every nation and every culture's history that has some really, they're pretty embarrassing. And I really commend people like Judi Bari. I really commend people like Judi Bari for standing up for something that she believes in, and for looking at the gaps and looking at the breaks and the cracks in industries and saying, this isn't right. this is exploiting people, and lives are being ruined, and forests are being demolished because of it, right? So I think whether or not you agree with people's stances, I think that hopefully you can appreciate the courage that it takes to say something and to be boots on the ground for something you believe in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There is nothing wrong with fighting for your belief systems. But I think something happens when passion overtakes. I don't know. I think you can kind of cross this weird, hypocritical reverse point where you subconsciously you embody the very thing that you're fighting against. Right?
Sure. Absolutely.
And, it's interesting. I don't know why this thought came to my brain, but I had a session with one of my clients. She was a senior and about to graduate. And she somehow, I don't remember the context or the premise of the conversations, but basically brought up this, she's about to go to college. She's going to live in an area that politically is very different from her political upbringing. And, she was really struggling with, how am I going to handle this? And I'm going to be around these types of people and so on and so forth. And we started talking and, two things that came from that conversation. And number one is I said, iron sharpens iron. I said, the best thing you can do is have conversations with people who are not from your culture, who are not from your faith,
Sure.
who are not from your political standing, your socioeconomic status, right? To really understand humans on all different levels. And then number two, I said, there is a place for every personality. I am not the carry a picket fence and shout and lay down in streets. I've never been that type, and I will probably never be that type. Instead, my purpose comes from doing the work one-on-one and session by session in the trenches with people who struggle, right? Who need that kind of support. Mm-hmm. And I think helping humans emotionally regulate can do more for society than screaming hateful slurs at people you don't agree with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Bailey and I are huge believers in communication. We both believe that showing people that you can communicate about things is a powerful thing. And again, that's what I really, really loved in Judi's story is her passion for, again, just this interprofessional collaboration and communicating with each other. And I think there's a lot that can be learned from that. So I do hope, good for the people who are in Judi's corner. I think it's great that they're still wanting to get those fragments tested. I think truth should always be brought to light, whether or not it's something you want to hear or something that could potentially be embarrassing. I think truth is important. And so I'm happy to hear that people are still fighting to discover the truth in this case.
Yeah, Chelsea and I are kind of like, what is it called? Bulldogs when it comes to accountability.
Yes. That is something that I will get behind.
Yeah, accountability is a big thing. I know that nobody's perfect. And if I make a mistake, I try really hard. And at this point, I think it's so ingrained from how we were raised. But taking accountability, like that was one thing that our parents had zero tolerance for, was if you did it, you own up to it.
1,000%.
And, and if you didn't do it, then you fight for that, right? Like you fight for your reputation, you fight for justice to be found. And I think that's why we say we're truth seekers, is because at the end of the day, just hold yourselves accountable. If you make a mistake, say you made a mistake. If you reported something that you saw online, there's nothing wrong with saying, oh, I got my facts wrong. I saw a post that my sister-in-law posted on Facebook, and someone commented and said, hey, I think you don't have all of the information. And I was so proud of my sister-in-law because she said, I looked into it and you're absolutely correct. I was misinformed. I will take this down and thank you so much. And I thought that was the most beautiful interaction.
It is. So, it's definitely not an easy thing. And, unfortunately, could there be some truth to that, to Judi's case? Was she trying to bring truth to light and people didn't like it? I don't know.
Yeah, probably.
The world may never know.
We'll never know. But on that note, you guys, we wish you a great break. If you miss us, send us an email or just re-listen to some old episode favorites, and then we will be back before you know it.
Yeah. And as always, we will catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators.
Hey, Wildcide Tribe, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildcide Podcast. Make sure to tune in on Wildcide Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's Wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below. As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on the flip side.